Welcome back to Sandy Bottom Homestead, everybody. I hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day. Today, this is something that I would tell you, it won't necessarily kill your garden, but it will definitely hinder your harvest and stunt your plants. So we've got to talk about it, man. And really, fall is the best time to give examples and one of the best times to start putting this into practice. And we've all made this mistake. That's the problem. Everybody has made this mistake and will continue to make this mistake for the rest of your gardening career. Guarantee it. So we had a freak tropical storm yesterday. It basically sat on us for a couple days, didn't do anything, then boom, all of a sudden it was a tropical storm, so we got a bunch of rain. And I haven't actually been out here in a couple days, which is truly a shame because I had planned to show the garden before and after I gave it a fertilizing, and that was through the fertilizer injector, but that didn't work. I did give it a fertilizing and it did do what I had anticipated, but that being said, it still just kind of didn't work out the way I wanted to for YouTube, but that's okay. There will be other opportunities, right? As long as I'm standing, there will be another opportunity. But you know, as we go through our garden, we can look and generally you can pick something that just hasn't really performed like you wanted it to. And you know, it does suck, but at the same time, when you look at it, you need to start diagnosing it. It's the elephant in the room. It's spacing. It's spacing our plants. It's really important, and each plant requires different spacing. So what I want to do is I want to go around to all of the freshly planted beds and just talk about how I spaced them. I'm also going to tell you why spacing is important, because once you understand why spacing is important, you can kind of just, it'll fall into place. And while I'm a big believer in really packing in plants, I'm also a big believer in what my mom always says is leave room for the angels to play in the garden. So we're just going to leave a little bit of room so the little garden angels can come in and they can do their thing. But that being said, I mean, you know, there's a happy medium between all of it. And so I do have some monocrop beds, which are really easy to go over, but I've also got some that aren't monocropped, and it'll give an opportunity to see how these things play together. Yesterday, we got over 8 inches of rain in one day. That's the problem with tropical storms. We needed rain, but not, I think the total was like 12 inches in one day, not 12 inches in a day. Just kind of doesn't really do anything, but whatever. Being said, you're gonna see this garden is a little beat up, as it should be. I mean, it got pounded yesterday. So we've got a couple things going on in this garden. We've got lettuce, pak choy, mustard greens sprouted, and then we've got a mix of kale and collards. And so going through, we've got our spacings down. Now what I've done here, and I said this in the previous video, but I planted them and I didn't thin them, and I was gonna thin them by now, but because of the rain, I'm gonna let them sit and see what bounces back good. You can see some of this stuff just got beat down bad. And you can also see here that the dirt is just, it just pounded it. So we're gonna have to work on that, but each one of these plants requires a different spacing for the most part. Now when you're planting a mixed bed like this, what I like to do is I like to put like plants in a row, and when I say like plants, I mean that require like spacing. So, you know, these 3 of these rows are the same plants, and then the back 2 are like spacing. Not exactly the same, but pretty close. And that way you can kind of not worry about having major issues within your garden and the spacing. So for instance, this lettuce here, they say you can get away with putting 4 lettuces in a square foot. And I've done that before, and it just made it a little bit tight. So what I like to do is about 2 to 3 lettuces per square foot roughly. You know, if a 4th one squeaks in there, fine. But that does give it enough space to kind of grow and allow for airflow to come in through the plants. Because if you don't have airflow, we can get a lot of diseases and funguses and stuff like that. Because I mean, think about it right now, this moisture is sitting on this plant. You can see it all on the leaves. So as the wind blows and it can get through here, it creates channels and it'll dry it out faster. So we typically do this about 3 to 4 per square foot. Now the pak choi in the back here, or in the next row, what we'll do is we'll do those about roughly 2 to a square foot. I don't do measurements in my garden. I don't have anything set up to measure. Over time, you get used to the measurements and you know how to kind of eyeball it. Nothing in a garden to me is exact measurements, and that's one thing I like about it. You know, anything you build can be very rough. It doesn't have to be super crazy and perfect and everything. I mean, each one of my beds are 4 by 8, but they're not really 4 by 8. One may be 3.5 by 8. One may be 4 by 7.5. You know, it doesn't really matter. And it goes the same with spacing. I will say this. A general rule for spacing is the more, the better. You can see that these are basically spaced apart, and if you notice how we've got this bed set up, so the winds can come, the drying winds will come from this direction typically this time of year. So what we do is we have the tighter packed plants here, and then it just gets less and less. So what that does is the drying winds will help protect this garden, but as it opens up per plant going back, we can get a little bit more airflow through and help those plants grow. So as of right now, the spacing is not really an issue as far as drying for most of these plants. It's in the later stage of life. You know, eventually this back row, which we'll get to in a second, will all be grown up and everything will be almost touching. So we want to try and avoid that as much as possible. You can see from the top how we've got a little bit of space in between. That means as these things grow, they can fill in, but they're not just crammed on top of each other together. Now, the mustard seeds in the back, you can see they're all sprouted. We eyeballed those, so roughly 1 to 2 per square foot will work. So that does really well. And then back here, it's 1 plant per square foot. So the kale and the collards both are about 1 per square foot. And that gives them plenty of space in between and helps them to stay healthy throughout the winter. The length of this video, this bed right here is nothing but broccoli, and this bed over here is nothing but cabbage. And I'm not going to talk about those separately. Before we move to the next bed, I think it's a good time to discuss why is spacing so important. Well, we've kind of touched on it with the the airflow and stuff like that, which is a big part of it. But where the action really happens is down below in the actual soil, and it's the roots. So what happens is as the roots spread and they look for nutrients, what they're going to do is they're going to stop when they meet more, and they're not really going to want to grow anymore. And so you've probably had a tomato plant get stunted and you're like, well, I can't figure out why it's stunted, what's going on. Well, that's what's going on. It's because of that, and it's because more than likely we've got it going on. Now, we've crowded them out. We haven't given them the space they need, which means there's more nutrients needed, which is just a whole different ball game. Really easy to overcrowd your plants. Is it so easy? Because it's hard to envision how big these plants are gonna get. I mean, you can see these Brussels sprouts here. So last year, like, we're still hammering out our method of Brussels sprouts and how we grow them and whatnot. Last year we planted them much, much closer together, and we actually opened it up this year because I saw how big the plants will get. And so I remembered, like, hey, I need to allow more room in between the plants. So that's why we've opened it up a lot more. And you can see I pulled some potatoes out, and now we've got all this buckwheat seed coming up, which isn't the end of the world. I don't really have to pick much of it. I'll probably do this one, but then after this, it'll probably all die off, or it will die off when we get our first freeze, but these Brussels sprouts will make it. So we had issues last year with our Brussels sprouts where they grew, but then they overgrew. And so what happened was they all were clumped together, and I got white mold on them, and I lost a couple of the sprouts got moldy, stuff like that. So the airflow going through will help, and the nutrient demand on the soil is much less this year. All that really means is we're going to be able to use our nutrients and our fertilizer more effectively in our garden. That's what we really need to keep from this, because this bed is cabbage and broccoli. So we're just going to cover both of those at one time for the sake of the length of this video. And that being said, they're both in here because they have like spacing requirements. And so we took advantage of that when we had to plant, and we put them together, and we just had extras, so that's why we combined them. I could care less if I combine them or not, but it really kind of did work out. So what we have is roughly a square foot per plant. Now, what's different between the cabbages and the broccoli? The cabbages are going to get a lot taller, or the broccoli is going to get a lot taller than the cabbage. So we use that to our advantage as well. That being, we'll put these up in the front. They'll get most of the sun now. We'll harvest them, and then these will be in the back, and they will be nice and rested and shaded. And it's opposite of what you would think, but this time of year, we want to keep this shade because this is a longer crop. The cabbages are. They're going to be in the ground much longer than these broccoli. Which, by the way, when we did the fertilizing, the broccoli and the cabbage, they both turned out really nice. They put on a little bit of length. They got a little bit of strength. So what I want to do today, for instance, is when it's nice and hot out, I want to come out and just see how these plants are responding to the heat. It's not supposed to get overly hot today, but with the excess water and stuff, and then we'll start to get an idea of which ones we need to thin out. I mean, if I look at this plant right now, this one clearly needs to stay. I mean, you can see the size difference in the two at the base of the stem. So we'll probably end up keeping this one, but we're just going to keep an eye on all of these and see which one is going to be the stronger, and then we'll start trimming back that way. But these have like requirements. Now, that being said, technically you can pack broccoli closer together than your cabbages, but because your cabbages are going to end up growing out like this, whereas your broccoli is going to grow up. So you can pack more of the broccoli in, and especially if you get into varieties, you can do a lot more. The one thing I know about cabbage in my yard is I don't harvest them all at the same time. So what we do is we start creating space after we plant. Thinking like, what does that mean? Well, basically what it means is as things are ready, we start harvesting them, and we may harvest some early to create more space. And that does act as, it'll open it up, give it more of that airflow. And we can even go through, like if we harvest, let's say like these right here are packed pretty close. So if we wanted to, if this one is about ready first, we could harvest it and then pull the roots out, and that would create more of an area for the other plants to take over. So it really does work out, and there's multiple ways to do it, but it really all starts when you plant your garden. That's when the biggest difference makes, because you're setting yourself up in the beginning to really get your garden growing in the right direction. You just spend a couple minutes talking about root crops. One thing about root crops is you can plant them a lot closer. This is my rutabaga bed. It's actually struggling. I don't know. It's kind of tough, but we'll work through it. But basically, like the rutabagas, they need to be a little bit farther apart, like 6 inches apart. But like turnips can be 4 inches apart. Radishes can be 2 inches apart. Potatoes are about 1 foot apart, so they are a little bit bigger, but that's a different kind of root crop. Carrots are, 2 to 3 inches apart technically, and you can see that you could pack a lot into a bed. Like I said, this is a really bad example. This bed is kind of struggling. I don't know, it looks like we've got a pest on us now. Yep. So we've got the cabbage worm here. So we got to come in and treat a little bit. We did fertilize, like I said, and that did push a little bit of growth. And I think all the rain we got just was really hurting it. And plus it was cloudy for like a week straight. So it didn't help the situation at all. So if you get your spacing wrong, you're gonna have a garden that's gonna grow. It's just not gonna be as productive and thrive like you want. And it takes time. Every year you'll learn a little bit more. But again, what we want to do is we want to take each year and we want to grow on it. We'll learn what the growth habits of plants are, the traits they are, the sizes that they get, and then you can apply them each time. And that's why there's a big argument of like not switching varieties every season. You know, stick with one variety for a couple seasons until you learn it, and then just kind of branch out, because you can get varieties that grow tall, small, big, thick, you know, in all different shapes and sizes. So it really does make a difference. You know, once you get the hang of what each plant will do though, and you can kind of adjust each year as needed. Now I will say I was a little worried about this bed, but look how good this cabbage is doing. It is really, really growing. It must be getting the right temperature or something back here. This is really, look at that cabbage. Same date as the other ones planted, twice as big. So it's just amazing what a little bit different space in your yard will do. Now, again, when I first planted my garden, I packed it in, buddy. I mean, you had a bed of tomatoes and, you know, a 4x8 bed of tomatoes, and I probably had 10, 12 of them in there. I mean, you know, anything that would go into a ground, when I bought seedlings, I packed them in. And what I ended up having to do was pull them out. And then it just messes up the whole feng shui of the garden, the way it's grown. Wrong use of that term, I know, but that's okay. You get what I'm saying. Point across. So, you know, as we do this, we start more and more, and it's really hard too, because a lot of us want instant gratification, and we want to look at a garden when we plant it and be like, wow, look at how it's growing, look how much I did in one day. But what you need to realize is in a couple months, in a month, that garden that looks sparsely planted will be absolutely filled to the brim, and you're going to be well on your way.